Okay, hi everybody. My name's Chris McHale. I'm CEO of SBK and Associates, and this is my podcast, which is titled Accelerating Product Development, which is all about conversations with product development leaders and experts who give us some real life perspectives on product lifecycle and accelerating it, managing it, and hopefully having some good stories along the way. So with me today is John Willis. And hi, John. Thank you so
Hey,
much for joining us.
sure.
Um, John is an author and probably an incorrigible entrepreneur, is what I would call it.
There you go.
Uh,
I
he's
like
had
that.
many positions in or related to product development and management. He's founded at least three companies, I think,
Actually, it's like
and doing
10, really.
10
But
companies. Oh
yeah, a
my
lot of
gosh.
them are like sinking ship disasters, but I
Yeah,
have a couple of wins. So,
so hey,
yeah,
we want to hear about all of it, including the
sure.
sinking ship ones. And also his DevOps evangelist, I would call you, right, and expert. So we're going to talk about all sorts of things today, but maybe you want to just tell us a little bit more about yourself and
Yeah, I've
what you
been
want
doing
to.
this. I've been doing this stuff for, we get to my age, you round down. So I'd say 40, but it's closer to 45 years. I've been in infrastructure and operations pretty much my whole career. I've run projects and development projects, but mostly my passion has been around the stuff that keeps all the other stuff working, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it started back in mainframe days, but about, I think in my late 40s, mid 50s, I got uh, into the sort of distributed computing world,
Hmm.
and that became incredibly interesting, and which led me to DevOps, right?
Yep.
The distributed computing, and so I was, I think there's like a couple of components to being successful. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but you need to listen really well,
Yeah.
and then surround yourself with, this is sort of cliched, but it's like it's the truth. It's capital T truth. Surround yourself with really smart people.
Yep.
And that puts you in the right place, right time. So that's really the narrative of my career is
Yeah.
really about being in such incredible positions that I put myself in. But like I was the first American, or the only American, the original DevOps days.
Oh,
So the
wow.
original one in Ghent, I was the only American there. I came back and helped with my good friend Damon Edwards create the first DevOps days in the U.S. I'll get into sort of the Gene Kim story a little bit, when we
Yep.
talk about why I'm a Deming fan.
Yep.
But I got to meet Gene Kim really early on. Got very involved in his summit. Just a lot of sort of great opportunities. So been considered, very important part of the DevOps movement. And then I got through some, again, being in the right place at time. We worked on this paper about what we called automated governance.
Mm.
That turned into a paper called DevOps Automated Governance, and actually turned into a book called Investments Unlimited. So, author of about, I think it's, depending on which books you count or not count, it could be 12 books, but because
Wow.
some of them were like red books from early IBM days.
Yeah.
And then done a number of startups. I sold a company to Docker. I sold a company to Dell. So yeah, just really blessed. Yeah.
That's a incredibly rich. Well, the word that was the word that was popping into my head when you were talking about that. Is
Uh-huh.
that's a super rich career and lots of there. And the other thing I was going to say is you talked about surrounding yourself with really smart people, but in order to do that, you have to have a fair amount of humility yourself. So I
You
think
do
that
have
you have
to.
that. Yeah.
I think people sort of accuse me of having too much humility. Like I find, it's sort of my personality to basically learn from really smart people.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of game it a little bit. Like I
Mm-hmm.
tell them how smart they are, but like they really are smart.
Yeah.
But it helps break the ice. You get to learn a lot more when don't be the one trying to teach everybody else something. Be the
Yeah.
one that listens the most.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. Really phenomenal advice that I try to instill on my daughter all the time.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well, your daughter
um,
listens to you. My sons don't listen to any word I
No,
say.
no, it depends on the age and it depends on the circumstance,
Sure,
right?
sure, yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, teenager years are maybe a little less so, but I think
Yeah.
it gets in there. I think they just don't
It
like
does.
it.
My
Hmm.
my oldest son is 26 now,
Okay.
it does. So all right, we got to take a little diversion because it's fun,
Yes,
right?
absolutely go. Yeah.
From about like to the time they can sort of walk, talk, and understand the world, till about 13, you're a genius.
That's right.
About 13, you become the dumbest person on the
Dumbest
planet
person.
until they get into college and they need money. Then you're
Uh-huh.
like, okay, smart. And then they get out into the real world, and I don't want to be too cynical. Then they become adults, and then they're like, ah, you're not bad, Dad. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Somewhere around 25, 26 is I think when they suddenly go, "Oh, you actually know stuff, right?
Yeah,
You
you're
can
actually
actually
a
help me."
human. You're a
Yeah.
person. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah.
I love it. That's great. It's so funny how every parent has that experience,
Yeah,
doesn't
that's right.
it?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, just to start out, and I'm fascinated by this because I'm nowhere near as deep as you into Deming, but I've always been a fan of his. But I'm just so interested in knowing how that happened, like what attracted you, qualities, capabilities, what have you, that just made you follow him, write about him.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
It was a number of things that happened, which was really interesting. I mean, I think the two, right? Like, I think that one of the other qualities is just to be a constant learner, right? You just
Yeah.
have this insatiable quest to learn, right? And I've always had that, fortunately, right? So, but um, I met Gene Kim. So Gene Kim, the author of the Phoenix Project, he was about halfway done. We were on a panel together. I knew who he was, but I didn't recognize who he was on the panel. The and so we got together, and he told me about this book he was writing, and it had a number of different names before it sort of settled on the Phoenix Project. And I asked, hey, can I get an early copy? And because it sounded fascinating, right? And he said, well, I what I would like you to do is read this other book first. And it was The
Mm.
Goal by Elliot Goldratt, right? And if you know Gene's book, it's a modern day rewrite of The Goal, purposefully, like they literally studied that book, right? In fact, we one of my audio books we did Beyond the Phoenix Project, which where Gene talks about the architecture of how they studied the goal. Anyway, so I read the goal, and the goal was like it was just got in my soul, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then I went ahead and I read pretty much the next four or five books of Goal Rats, right?
Hmm.
And um, and I was all in on Goldratt, and I still am. I think Goldratt was a tremendous, philosopher of management and his theory of constraints. And and then I remember it was the first DevOps days in the U.S. Another person named Ben Rockwood, who was really, really in tune, probably the most knowledgeable operations research DevOps person, right?
Hmm.
Which two
Hmm.
words that really never went together really well. Um, we were in this open space, and we were talking about theory constraints and go right, and he challenged me. He said, "John, it all goes back to Deming." And at the point, I didn't even know who Deming was. So this is like 12 years ago, maybe. And I'm like, "No, I'm not a go rat. Don't confuse me, right? This." And he said, I'll tell you what. Why don't you go ahead and do your research, look at Deming's 14 points, and then tell me if you don't think it's interesting. And I did, and I was like, how does this guy? Then I did some research on who he was, and like, he's basically coming up with these ideas, 50 years
Yeah.
prior to, so like, this is like 2013 or 12, and in the or 10 actually, but um, and I was like, wow, this person is unbelievable. And then what was sort of combined with that, so Ben Rockwood had then did a presentation where he talked about the history of DevOps, and he went back to Lean, and he talked about Toyota and Toyota Ono,
Yep.
and he mentioned Deming, and he sort of passed the torch at the end of the presentation. He said somebody should take this and take it further. I wrote a Deming to DevOps presentation, and I just started studying, like, and at some point I realized, again, one of the things I tell people about like the Deming thing is like beware. If you're going to get into Deming, you're going to get hooked. And it's
Yeah.
it's it's like you're going down this it's a beautiful
Path.
rabbit hole, but it's a
Yeah.
rabbit hole,
Yeah.
and it never stops, right? So,
Yeah.
so yeah, that was well over 10 years ago. And then I just kept running into these amazing stories, and then me and Gene did this Beyond the Phoenix Project. So it was modeled after Beyond the Goal by GoRat. Like 5 years after the Phoenix Project, could we have a discussion?
Yeah.
And I covered Deming, he covered GoRat, he covered we covered a bunch of cool topics. And I Gene, at that when it was done, he says, you should write a book about Dr. Deming.
Yeah.
and that was it. I was in. And the only one last thing is I love the Michael Lewis style of telling a
Yeah.
book, right? He
Yeah.
takes a very complicated story.
Yep.
It really is a biography in disguise.
Yes. Right.
And he makes it so everybody who reads it, whether you're a quant, you still get enjoyment out of Flash Boys, right? Like
Yep.
which is about arbitrary trade, latency trading,
Yep.
arbitrage, right?
Yep. Yep.
And my mother-in-law would love it, right? So I was like, Deming is the perfect character to create that kind of book of a very complex idea, which is his system of profound knowledge, but tell the stories so that everybody that reads it, whether you're an expert in management theory or I use my mother-in-law always as one of my target readers. She reads, 6 books a month.
Mm.
She has nothing to do with technology. Could I write a book that she would enjoy? And my book, Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge. I had two target readers: Ben Rockwood, who's his operations research guru, and my mother-in-law. And by all accounts, they both thought it was. If they're telling me the truth, they both thought it was a great book.
Well, I just found out about it and I'm definitely interested because I love Deming, but I also love a good story. And then I think I saw now you're trying to relate Deming now, or not trying, but you're in the process of relating him to some of the AI stuff that's going on, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about
Yeah,
that? And then we
that
can
gets a
jump
little
into
more.
AI a bit.
I think there's some interesting. There's a lot of interesting plays on AI, and AI has this sort of like its whole embryo all by itself. But
Yeah.
and there is sort of in my mind like a holy grail, and it starts with like did Deming was there any, and I told you I'm writing a book about the history of AI, right? So which goes
Right.
back to some of these incredible thinkers in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, 70s, 80s, like
Yep.
amazing. And a few of those people Deming has interacted with, substantially, but I can't find any sort of connection that he was had any works directly related to things that became neural networks or these symbolic or sub-symbolic AI constructs. But what really there's a couple of things that really sort of I think play out well is if you think about we use the term socio-technical systems, right? And so Deming never used that term as far as I can tell in his writing, but like he was all around those concepts
Hmm.
of how the humans and the technology have to work together in concert. And I think, there's really interesting about what does autonomous or agentic like AI, which is really the newest phase of this stuff, right? These
Right.
sort of tools that can really accomplish very complex tasks. And what is the sort of the play of thinking about social technical systems where we were thinking about humans and just sort of non-autonomous, or not autonomous not the world, but I'll say agentic, but it's really sort of AI-based technology. So where does all our things we've talked about with social technical systems play with AI? And then there's a much deeper, like probably don't want to go too far down here, but um, is that there's some really interesting philosophy ideas about what is what is deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, and then this whole concept of abductive reasoning.
Huh.
And there's a lot in the abductive reasoning and some of the original pioneers of the 20th century or pioneers of abductive reasoning that gets really fascinating, but that's
Huh.
still very meta at this point.
Okay. Right. Um,
That's a
so
lot, a lot
yeah,
to
that was
unpack.
that's okay though. Um, so we'll just keep going down this path a little bit of AI because I know you've been talking a little bit about you've been running some workshops related to AI and
Yeah.
DevOps. You have some ideas about kind of the role of AI and who's playing what roles. And I'm also interested. This is a large question, but so I'm interested in that. But I'm also really interested in. Well, I'll save the practical question for after that. But maybe just get a sense of your vision of AI right now in the current infrastructure, in current DevOps, and current uh, like information technology in the company.
Yeah, I mean it's so the good news, right, is first off it's do or die. You have no choice. You
Yeah,
have to get involved in this stuff.
yeah,
There's no fence sitting on this one. Back in the early days of DevOps, I used to say there was in early days of DevOps. I'd talk to a CIO and I'd say, there's a 3% club and there's a 97% club. Which one do you want to be part of? And the 3% Club was going to have amazing opportunities that the 97, the ones who didn't understand
Yep.
the principles of DevOps. Now, it
Yep.
doesn't say that it's easy. It doesn't say that it works. Everything's perfect.
Right.
It's just that, the thing I would try to sell to a CIO is you can be part of a club that gives you such incredible advantage.
Yep.
But the clarity of that advantage in DevOps was still, I think we've seen it, we know it, we've seen,
Yep.
what's happened over the last 15 years with DevOps and the commerce that's created, and but now with sort of generative AI, I don't, there's no fence sitting on this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's sort of good news. And part of that good news too, I was just at Gene's conference. It used to be called DevOps Enterprise Summit. It's been renamed to the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit.
Hmm.
And he had an AI day. And I mean, John Rouser from Cisco got up, and I've written some papers with him, and he said that, what people don't understand is a 1% gain at Cisco is huge, right?
Right.
And neither are true,
Right.
but the question is, what gains can you get? And the gains, the evidence of the gains, I mean, it's
Yeah.
1%. It's like there, Adidas, Fernando Conagro, and I pronounced his name wrong. He's a friend of mine. I pronounce everybody's name wrong. Um, they were talking about like different areas, like retrieval of information, 80%
Yeah.
improvement. I mean, 70, 80% improvement across the board in all their
Wow.
experimentation. Now, it's still in experimentation mode.
Sure. Right.
But here's the glass is half empty side of it is what I worry about is one, I think everybody needs to get up to speed. They need to learn how to use this technology. They need to sort of solve their own problems with it so they can learn it. I've created sort of a loose taxonomy for describing the componentry so that you're not in the blind. If you think about the lamp stack, how that was instrumental in
Yep.
sort of web services. I've come up with this idea of a LORMR, this language model, orchestration, observability, which is a little bit different in terms of how it's not performance latency and sort of normal sort of observability or telemetry. It's about the correctness, the relevance, um, the bias and hallucination manager
Right.
of. So this is a new form. And then you have RAG, which is the vector databases or creating
Right.
your own sort of corpus data, and then you have model management, and then agentic, which I talked a little bit. So I've been trying to promote that as an educational thing,
Hmm.
primarily because I believe there's a technical debt tsunami
Yes.
coming in two, three, four orders of magnitude in anything we saw. I've been using the term shadow AI, right,
Yep.
and
Yep.
say that shadow IT was just a tiny blip on the radar
Yeah.
compared to if we don't manage this. So I've written a couple articles and presentations called Dear CIO.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get a hold of this thing. You need to
Yep.
manage it. Like you can't just, what we're seeing is CEOs are hiring chief AI officers.
Right.
And in a lot of those cases, the chief AI officers are just going off and building infrastructure. And
Right.
the truth is that when you look at most modern AI architectures that people are building, a small footprint of it is AI. The bigger footprint of things like Kubernetes, Kafka,
Ah. Huh.
Redis, they're all the infrastructure things.
Right.
And
Right.
so what we don't want is your non-operational infrastructure people building that stuff.
Right.
That's going to be a disaster.
Right.
So that's the thing I'm really passionate about now, which is, how do we educate the INO side of the business? How do we get them to realize they need to come up to speed so they can ask the right questions? If you take that
Right.
Lormer stack, like, if you don't manage this, you might have 400 models that you're managing in a year from now. You might
Right.
have 30 vector databases. You might have
Right.
13 versions of your lang chains and llama index. And
Right.
so, dear CIO, do what you do really well. Manage this. Create
Yep.
constraints to go faster. All those
Yep.
things. So spend a lot
Governance over
of
all of
time.
that. Right.
That's right. It's all the
Right.
things we do that
Yep.
help our customers and our businesses understand the rational ways to build and manage services and so on.
Right. Right. What do you see as the role of more on the DevOps side now for a second? What do you see? What should be the role? of the people that are working in that. That's more on the
Yeah,
ops side, would
I
probably
think
like what should they be doing right now?
yeah, I think that's back to like whether it's my taxonomy or somebody else's, but I think most people building taxonomy are putting their vendor character in the middle. So they're
Yeah,
all a version of my llama, but they'll like their whatever their vendor is will be the character.
yeah,
But like for RAG, they'll put the character in. So people need to understand what the stack looks like.
yep,
And then secondly, like in order to be able to be educated on being able to like when the CIO says, "Hey, you've been my trusted advisor, your DevOps, your sort of infrastructure, like HR is bringing in this new tool."
mm,
I want them to be able to say, "Well, let me ask him some questions,"
yeah,
as opposed to like, "I don't know,"
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
and so I think that like a real big part is like I think SRE needs to be right in the middle of this right now.
okay,
What do we learn from sort of Google and SRE, right? If you set up SRE properly in an organization, SRE would have constraints. They'd say, well, you can only run this, it comes
yep,
from Google, right? Only
yep,
two kernels, or only two this, two Java logging frameworks, two, right? And those constraints create the flow. So I think right now, SRE needs to get educated in conjunction with DevOps, DevSecOps, and be able to, sort of be able to say, hey, we will manage that stack if you're using, ChromaDB and MongoDB Atlas Vector Search for your vector database. If you're using LangChain, these versions. If you're using these models, we picked a good selection of models that we think work.
yep,
If you can't get your vendor or your project to use these selected ones, then you have two options. You can sort of try to get somebody to convert to the ones that we support. We have relationships with the vendors. We know it. We're experts at these. If not, you can't be SRE managed.
right,
And that's how we do it now for all other things. Here's the thing.
right,
This is a technology problem.
exactly,
There'll be a
right,
time where we won't call it AI.
right.
It's just going to be a new service, a
Another
new product, a
stack.
new
Yep,
delivery, and it's going to
yep.
have all this stuff, and it's going to have the icing on the cake, which is a bunch of interesting, complex things about AI. But in the end of the day, it's a technology problem.
Well, that's what I was thinking when you were talking, and with some of the other things that I've read that you've been saying. It's really, when you get right down to it, it's no different than the relationship between almost software development and then the ops side of things right now. That the developers are creating, they're developing, they're trying things, but they have to do it within certain parameters that the ops people can manage and control and do stuff with, right? So this is no different. But so really, to
Yeah.
me, what you're saying is what these DevOps engineers need to do is get really familiar with the various technologies that are coming up
And
and like AI.
And the beauty of that is there's a lot of really cool problems to solve with this
Yeah,
technology in our
yeah,
space.
yeah,
Incident management, problem man. I mean, there's, like these tools can do, I'm seeing people at hackathons build these beautiful like tool sets around
mm,
AI that basically makes our DevOps, our SRE, our DevSecOps way more productive. And we're getting to learn the questions that we need to ask to support all the other business pieces.
right, right. So if you, along those lines, if you were well, let's even take it up a level. Let's say you were a CTO or somebody who's in product management, like a mid-sized company. Let's not go huge. Let's go kind of smaller or
Sure.
mid-size. What would you be doing right now vis-a-vis two sides, both your product and maybe introducing some sort of AI into your product, but also on the support side, what would you be doing on the DevOps or the ops side? What would you be asking your people to do? How would you be asking them to experiment? Are there particular technologies or stacks that you would be saying, look into these things? What would you do if you were in that place right now?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I'll go back to like, I think you need to understand the stack.
Yep.
What they are, how they're interconnected, how are we going to manage that, right? So I'd want, my CIO, CTO. There was a great presentation last week by Brian Scott from Adobe, and he's been deeply into sort of running AI. He was at Disney. He's been sort of an extraordinary DevOps person. He brought sort of Docker and Kubernetes like
Mm,
really early into Disney, and but so now he's very focused on sort of managing at scale, sort of what a DevOps person would do at Adobe. And the thing that was interesting is, one of the things they talked about is a data classification
Okay.
right? So in the early days of cloud, if I went into an organization and sort of was talking to a CIO or some people who brought me in, a chief of staff of the CIO, part of my like, is this worth my time working with this client? That's another sort of like fortunate thing, right? Like there's a lot
Mm.
of people I know struggle to get work. Like I've always been fortunate enough to be able to pick my clients, right? And so I would ask one question: do you have a data classification model for cloud?
Hmm.
And if they looked at me like I was a deer in the headlights, I knew this is probably they're way too early.
Yep.
If they could let them just get some people to teach them the APIs and the stuff that like
Yep.
there are other people who do a way better job than I do. But if they did understand it, then I knew they were at a maturity level because the cloud was all about data classification.
Right.
Right? Where were you going to put what type of data need to be tiered, where it could go, whether it could run, all the characteristics of your licensing. Well, interesting enough, that's the first thing they talked about with AI is the
Huh.
data classification model, which again makes sense.
Yeah.
Is the data synthetic? Is the data public? Is the data restricted, or is the data proprietary?
Yep.
Deep IP, right? Like so, they had four classifications. So every project has to basically start with that, and that's sort of all this. When it determines a whole lot of things what you can do next.
Right.
And then on all those, then they go to like security, risk, and governance.
Yep.
So, and legal. So now they have another tier within that matrix. And this is, again, this is how the problem I do, so I sort of get cynical is every time we find a new flashy technology, we break all the rules.
Yeah.
And so I'm
Right.
seeing a lot of rule breaking where, oh, we got to go fast. Don't slow me down, right? Oh, like I can't get slowed down. Like, but the truth it is, I was speaking to somebody recently. It was a chief AI. They weren't a chief AI, but they might as well be. They were on an island. They were a large enterprise. They were
Mm.
building phenomenal stuff. And I asked the person, I said, have you had any discussions about this technology with the CISO?
Yeah.
And their face dropped. They knew, like, they had to answer truthfully, and the answer was no.
Mm.
So I said,
Wow.
here's the thing. You're going to take your aspirin now or you're going to take it later, but you're
Yeah.
going to be taking aspirin, right? Like, and so the thing I admire about the Adobe is like they're in the experimental phase. In fact, again, constraints create flow. Now everybody has clarity.
Yeah.
Like you can go through and select. So if I'm a CTO, the other thing I think was important, I saw Cigna said this publicly, right? That they created like the kind of big company AI do's and don'ts. Like HR sends it to you, it goes on your record.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about that is, and I'm not a big fan. I like organizations that can create nimble and people can experiment. But in this world right now, when it's so nascent and there's a lot of dangers, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like again, the power of this thing is the sort of the dragons are like huge, right? And so in this case, you can't do if you like, I went to work, I sold the company to Dell, right? And so
Mhm.
Dell has a lot of like, every year you had to take one of those tests and it
Yeah.
talked
Yeah.
about environmental and hard hat stuff, right? Because you
Mm.
might be in a building there. But like, those tests are designed that you can't cheat, you can't get through them, you can't like go. And so like this idea of like telling everybody what their expectation is about AI right now. What are the like you can do? What are the things you probably ought to get guidance? And what are the things you definitely can't do?
Right.
And it may
Right.
change, but right now you can't say, "Oh, well, I didn't know."
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, you knew. That was
Yeah.
clearly on that certification thing you took. It said
Yep.
this is a do not do,
Yep.
right? And so and I think that because the stakes are so high,
Yeah.
when we start giving way to this level of automation, which I think is a beautiful thing. I love it. I'm a
Hmm.
technologist. I've loved automation since, back, in the 80s when I first started playing with this,
Hmm.
or general automation. But the risks of these things making decisions or doing things the wrong way, if we're not putting the guidance levels in here, like the Air Canada was a sort of just a baby version of
Hmm.
all the things that could go on, because I'll say one last thing, right? Not one last thing, but a thing, which is, what do we do? I always think, what does operations and infrastructure do? We protect the brand.
Hmm.
That's
Yep.
what we do. And,
Hmm.
and it's really nothing more important. than protecting the brand, because everything, the brand is the brand, right? Like,
Right.
and so we have there are like the AI stuff is do or die. You have to do it. Your CEO will not take no for an answer, but we still have to figure out a way to protect the brand.
Right. Right. It's it is a balance between, I think, like you said in the earlier on, it's this balance between moving and moving as quickly as you can, and yet putting enough guardrails around what's going on in order to just not fall off the cliff. Because I
That's right.
think this is one where it would be super easy to fall off the cliff,
Yeah, no, I
especially
mean
for
it.
larger companies.
Yeah, I mean think about like again, there's the whole sort of hallucinations, but there's tools that you can, if you're sort of learning the construct of how this stuff works. That's why the O in Lorma, right? It's important to understand. Like people say, well, it hallucinates, but we'll have to deal with it, or I
Yeah,
can't do it because it hallucinates. Well,
yeah.
the observability in Gen AI is about tools that can do hallucination management. It can check for bias. It can, literally you can put guardrails, like some of the new Google stuff in Vertex has some beautiful guardrails for like a sort of a model accidentally creating a racial slur
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, which could happen
Sure.
unguarded,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
innocently too, right? But like you can't, you just can't like do that. I think
Right.
about like this is sort of a little bit of sideshow, but I don't know if you saw the Palo Alto. At the it was it was the security conference. I don't know if it was RSA or
Yeah, I haven't seen
it
that.
was Black Hat, but they had
Mm-hmm.
this is terrible, just terrible. They had two women models with lampshades on their head in front of their yeah, it was like, I mean, like and this isn't Gen AI, but
No.
like they got, I mean, there are people, not just women, men, myself,
Yeah.
screaming for the head of the CMO.
Right.
Like,
Right.
well, that was
Right.
stuff that we've been around for a while, right?
Right.
That's the stuff they used to do in the
Yeah. Like
90s.
you don't do that. That
Yeah,
is
it was
that's tone
insane,
deaf.
right?
Right.
Like you
Yeah.
don't want AI accidentally. That was just stupidity, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
like you don't even have to be stupid for AI to do something that is just
Right.
terribly disrupts your brand.
Right. Right. And yet, you need to go forward with it. And yet, like you said, you have to protect as best as you can
That's right.
um, the things that are inevitably going to happen. Do you have a particular stack, if you want to call a AI a stack now? Do you have a particular stack or technology that you're working with that you might not recommend, but like make as a suggestion if you're a DevOps person or somebody in this mid-market company, what would you do first? Like what would you
Yeah,
experiment with?
I
What would you do?
I think the simplest construct is and again, I think it's the getting started, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
sort of because then what you're going to find is as you get more advanced, there are better ways, more intricate ways to do things. But sort of LangChain seems to be the sort of most reasonable way to do language model orchestration. You need an
Okay.
orchestrator. You need
Right.
something that's basically going to like put things together. Now you can, as you get more advanced, you can find ways you may or may not lead LangChain, but it's the leader.
Hmm.
So I like LangChain. Llama Index is a second, and the list goes on. But I like getting started. There's more oxygen out there at LangChain, and then there's again. I even though most people like when I teach classes, I make sure they know about the observability piece. Like,
Yeah.
well, can I wait on that? No, man. Like
No,
that's
no.
bad hygiene. Get it right
Yeah.
from the get go,
Yeah.
right? And so LangChain has something called LangSmith, which is it's sort of a built-in. It can check bias, relevancy.
Hmm.
I actually like another tool called Arise it's an open source tool. It's a little more easier. The the LangChain observability tool like it feels like you have to be an AI expert to use
To
it. That's
use it.
my
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas this Phoenix Arise, which is also open source and free, is it just sort of like it made sense to me to be able to
Yeah.
do these complex manage. And then I've got to say this with like I got to I protect my client, and I think I can make a strong argument for both, right? So one of my clients is MongoDB. They have
Hmm.
Atlas Vector Search. I can we don't want to spend a if you want to just ping me, I can give you all the reasons why if you're a large enterprise, you probably should use that tool. That's
Hmm.
why, like I said, I pick my clients, I pick them. But
Hmm.
if you're getting started, ChromaDB,
Okay.
which is the free sort of has an in-memory version.
Hmm.
I use both of those in my sort of labs and workshops. And now the models, like the models, I think are a little more complicated. You really have to start figuring out. You got to do your homework on the model,
Hmm.
as far as I can tell. Nobody's going to tell because what you're going to start doing is taking your own data. So, like I said, the RAG was basically MongoDB, Atlas Vector, or ChromaDB, but that means you're going to start like incorporating your own data, your own
Right,
knowledge, your own API calls. So
right.
that means that you need to figure out which models best suit the output and the sort of the answers that you want to get.
Hmm.
And there, as far as I can tell, there's like people can tell you, or there's leaderboards like this is the best of this. You just have to experiment. You have
Okay,
to.
you just try
It's
different ones.
this is
Hmm.
a data engineering problem. It
Yes,
really is.
right,
It is. It is.
right.
I have some really important data. I want this Gen AI to make sense of, like I have maybe I have a standards and procedures document that I want to make more malleable to
Hmm.
my organization, right?
Yep.
And so I want, instead of having somebody go to some index and read 30,000 pages to
Hmm.
find, like, could I make that into a chat bot, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, so in that case, I take the standard procedures, I create these embeddings in a vector store. Now I can use that in really any foundational model, like the OpenAI, GPT-4s, or whatever.
Hmm.
But the point I'm going to want to get to is I want to, and this is a really important point.
Hmm.
Um, if you're building a chatbot, sort of a Geneva application, to tell people where to go to lunch at the headquarters,
Hmm.
they have something called naive RAG, right? Like just throw your data into RAG, set it, questions will be fine.
Right.
But if like one of the clients I worked with, they're literally building these LLMs for people climb up on telephone poles
Wow.
to find out what the right procedure is for something that needs to be connected, and like
High
the wrong
risk.
answer will kill somebody,
Yeah.
right? You want to really, it doesn't mean you can't use the tool.
Right.
It just means you better, like, and even from a liability standpoint, you better
Right.
have proof of evidence that you've done an
Right.
incredible amount of work to
Right.
get the best answer.
Right.
So again, this is not a binary thing. So the models, that's where you really want to spend a lot of time sort of working the data. And then sort of the last piece, which is really exciting, is really this kind of what they're starting to call agentic,
Huh.
where like if you think about something like Copilot, which helps you write code.
Hmm.
Well, these agentic tools are ones that sort of solve problems.
Okay.
Microsoft has this thing called Copilot Workspace.
Right. Hmm.
You literally grab an issue on GitHub and it tries to understand the whole repo. It comes up with what it understands your issue is, and it literally just then gives you a sort of a template of how it's going to fix it. If you say proceed, it basically, if you hit the continue button or whatever, it'll actually generate the code.
Hmm.
If you like the code, you can it'll create the pull request. So there's
Wow.
a whole bunch of products like that now that are really trying to do multiple tasks, multiple LLMs, trying to figure out how to solve very complex task-oriented
Right.
things. And that's an incredible, and the area where it's really incredible for software engineers is there's a whole what they call SWE Bench, which is a leaderboard for SW software engineer, SWE Bench,
Okay. Hmm.
which is a leaderboard for how well different open source and proprietary tools are solving these kind of
Hmm.
software engineering, like creating a new feature, fixing a
Right.
bug,
Right.
those kind of things. And that's the A in my Lorem stack. So I would literally learn the stack. I would start playing with these tools, make sure I understand how these tools can solve my problems,
Right.
which will create the efficiencies of your sort of your teams or your parts of an organization,
Right.
and then make you aware of how you need to support the technical debt tsunami that's
Right.
coming down the pike.
And also then keep you better educated so that
Right.
when the different business units or whoever come to you and say, hey, I want to use this thing because they
That's
saw it
right. That's right.
somewhere on the
You
web,
can ask
right? You
you
can
can
ask the
ask the
right
question, what
questions,
vector
right?
databases are you using?
Right.
Why are you using that? We're really good at these too. Or
Right.
even better, you have an SRE program that says, hey, we won't
Yeah.
SRE manage you unless you're using one of these two.
Using those two, yeah. It's funny how when you were talking about that, and I've thought about this for a while, that 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 it really is kind of primarily at this moment a data engineering problem, or a big part of it is a data
Yeah.
engineering problem, not an quote unquote AI problem or an AI thing to solve.
Yeah. It's more
It's
about
about getting
data.
good about data. Yeah,
Yeah, and getting
yeah,
good about the conversation. You're creating applications that are creating natural language conversations. And what we want to do is basically, sort of in the meta sense, fine tune how those conversations evolve, right?
Right.
That's all
Right.
about what data do I have, what kind of questions people are going to ask,
Right.
how well have I orchestrated, engineered all the componentries that get from my corpus of data to an answer that may have high consequences.
Right. That was the other thing I was thinking because our company does a lot with medical device, which is a industry that deals with products that have a lot to do with safety, of course.
Yeah,
And the
sure.
way that you develop and manage technology in a situation like that with products like that is totally different because of the high consequences and the high risk that is associated with it.
Well,
So this is the same, right? You're saying what's the risk associated with the answers that you're going to provide, and you're
well,
going to do different things.
and in that utility company too, what was interesting is really all it's getting the sort of the technician is to the system of record data. So they're not
Right.
actually
Huh.
I think there's a I think like in the medical device, right? I don't know that I think it depends on the consequence of the device and what it can do,
Sure.
right? But I think probably the sort of the stop is that I want to make it so easy to get to the system of record answer for this particular
Hmm.
question, right? So this it's
Interesting.
an interesting blend there. It's not AI answering everything and
Right.
understanding everything. It's AI shortening the gap
Right.
of getting to the best possible answer that is
Right.
the system record of answer, right? Which again, that's an interesting model for developing an
And
application.
so yeah, and I'm so glad you said that because that is a big part of where I think these efficiencies come in when you're talking about something internal to a company and the data inside of a company. It's not about necessarily just I got the answer because I typed the question in. Is I typed the question in and it took me to the correct
That's
answer,
right. That's
the
right. That's right.
correct place.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's the thing about it's the natural language interface
Yep.
to getting the knowledge. And again, that that it's when people say, "Well, we could never use Gen AI for medical devices."
Right.
Oh, yeah, you could. You
You
could
could.
still keep the system of record. If that's wrong, then you got a bigger problem anyway, right?
Right. Right.
Right. But that, well, like you said, what if it's taking technicians an hour to find the right answer that
Right.
is system of record, and now I can give them a handheld on sort of handheld that literally gets them to the system of record data within seconds.
Right. I was even thinking about it simply like with product lifecycle management and product, and let's stay within the med device. That's the system of like that is the kind of the Bible, right? That's where everybody has to go to get answers about whatever questions they have about what is current, what is released, what is
That's right.
whatever.
That's right. That's right.
And
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes it takes a long
Long
time to
time,
figure out,
right? Right.
where to get there. Yep.
And,
And you don't
and I'll
even
go
have to
back to
get to the
that.
right place.
Yeah, and I go back to the Cisco. Like again, like we got to stop thinking binary about this, right? Like, in
Yes.
other words, like at Cisco, a 1% gain is huge. So the
Yes.
question is, does Gen AI replace all humans and solve everything? And no.
No.
Does it give us a 5% gain, an 8% gain? Does it
Yep.
reduce hours worth of, searching through documents down to seconds?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And that's what, and I love that part because we're all about how can you make engineering and the creativity that goes on in engineering more efficient? Like, how can they
That's
get
right.
more productive and better at what they do and less of the tedious manual, whatever work that they hate to do? Well, this is a great way to do
Well,
that, right?
and the other thing that's important too, and I've experienced myself, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot more numbers. We're going to see joy in work because what are the things that annoy us most about being in any kind of work, but certainly technical work, right? It's the interrupts.
Yes.
The
Yep.
like, oh, now I've got to go here to get that. Oh, let me go
Yeah.
get coffee, right?
Yeah.
It's the non-productive.
Yep.
I mean, what I find now for myself, the things that I would literally say, "Ugh, I'll work on that tomorrow." I'd like, no, let me just ask. And
Right.
so that everything you do, even your prototype, your
Right.
example, you get the feedback loop is instantaneous.
Right.
And even though it may be wrong, like it's one thing to be. I worked on a thing this weekend on a workshop I'm doing, and one of these tools that I was using has automated sort of a chat bot to answer your question, and it was wrong a lot.
Yeah.
And I like was getting frustrated. It's like you call up press one for all the ways autonomous and telephony has improved your life, right?
Uh-huh.
Press two for, but like I felt like that with this, but in the end, I got the right answer, and it was about 40 minutes of like having a wrestling match trying to explain to it. And now most people would think, oh, isn't that terrible? No, but if I would have had to do that with other humans,
Yeah.
best case, it would have been 3 or 4 days.
Right. Right.
I had my answer, and I got to the right answer by having that wrestling match with it. Again, that's a feedback loop. I'm engaged. I'm not sort of, well, I'm
Right.
going to have to send out a LinkedIn message and see if anybody
Yeah.
knows about this,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
maybe I'll get an answer tomorrow afternoon, right? Like, yeah, it's the feedback
Well,
loop will create the joy and work.
and along those lines, here's just something I thought of when you were describing that. I mean, how many times as engineers or just whatever, people, right, working in productivity, how many times do you go off to try to figure out an answer for something and then you get distracted because you're
Oh
in
yeah, yeah,
another
yeah.
tool or you're typing
Oh
over
yeah,
here and
that's
then
right.
you see
That's right.
something else and you completely lose your train of thought, you completely lose your focus, and then you come back to it and you're, knocking yourself at the side of the head going, why did I allow myself to go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah,
But here is something that actually could almost keep you focused because
it
it
does.
keeps you in that window almost,
Yeah,
if that
no,
makes
which we
sense.
know
Yeah.
that's the most productive. I mean,
Right.
this is good. This is back to go rat, drum buffer rope, right? It's
Yes.
like his,
Yes.
that's that cadence of that connecting and trying to get, don't, there's a great story of Delta with maintenance repair operations. They took before they implemented a go rat model of theory
Uh-huh.
of constraints, it was taking 60 days to repair an engine. They got it down to 7 days. And one of the
Wow.
biggest things they did is at any given time, there'd be like in any shop floor, there'd be like 10 engines being worked on. And people would be working, like a part would come in, oh, let me go grab that one.
Yeah.
And they basically they put in the sort of whip limits and things like that, where they literally, you couldn't start on an engine until like, they figured out a cycle of they take the engine apart and then they'd send out the certain parts they'd send out. They figured out the maximum amount of days for a round trip for a part to come back. And so like would be sort of like they call disassemble, D0 disassemble engine.
Yeah.
D0 plus 7, you couldn't touch that engine.
Huh.
And
Wow.
like and that there was a lot of other things, but that was one of the core reasons why they got down from 60 days to 7 days was because, and at first, technicians were like, "Why can't I work on this?"
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
they literally
Yeah.
had to move the engine somewhere. Like I'm not doing anything right now. No,
Yep.
you
Yep.
don't get it.
Yep.
There's a rhythm, there's a cadence,
Yep.
right? And yeah, and I think that this instantaneous feedback loop with a natural language interface is just going to make us
It's huge. Yeah.
way more productive.
And I think once we can get past this part, happier because you won't have to do that other tedious
That's
work
right.
or
Yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
distracted and do other stuff.
The toil is non-happiness, right?
Yeah.
Um, interrupts are non-happiness, right?
Oh,
So
total non-happiness. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're actually running out of time. Unfortunately, John, this has been a fabulous conversation. Really, really happy that you came on to share some of these things that you're
yeah,
doing, some recommendations for us. Do you have any other last words or last pearls of wisdom you want to share?
yeah. I'd say something corny but true. Just
Mhm.
be nice to people.
Yeah,
Just honestly, right? It's
yeah,
like it doesn't get said enough because we think it's too corny to say, but like,
it's not. And
yeah,
I
it's
think
not.
people need to hear it a lot these
I
days.
agree. I agree.
It's
So
huge. It's so
yeah,
important. So. Well, John, thank you again,
yeah.
and
Well, thank you.
have a wonderful end of your week. And can't wait to look at the books that are coming from you. It's going to be
Sure.
great.
All
Yeah.
right.
All right. Thanks so much.